there are parts of farming I think you'll never be able to understand if you haven't had that lived experience. So being able to show up and share that with them and understand it is so important. And it leads to, I think a lot of important, really good grassroots type conversations about trying to understand people and their farms holistically. Because I think one of the things that makes us really unique as a certification program is we don't separate out the certification from the community building, from the politics. I think to us, those things are all one and the same. And I think you can see it when you're on the farm. And I've had so many, for every good conversation I've had with people about their cover cropping practices, about their pasturing processes, about all of that, I've had the same number of really amazing conversations with people about their families, about mental health, about where they see their role in the community, about their fears around climate change. I think that's so important that when we're going to the farm, we're not just saying, let's take a checklist, let's just check the boxes, not have a conversation about the why, but just the what, and then move on, because I think people don't feel as seen in that process. And that's why oftentimes people don't want to participate.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label distinguishing organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Real Organic Project's Director of Certification, Ariel Pressman. Now that we've crossed 1,000 farms in our program, we wanted to share more about who we are, our standards, and what it takes to become certified as a Real Organic farm. For farmers, here's your reminder that our certification is completely free and entails walking the farm instead of going over paperwork, which is a privilege we have as an add-on. And for eaters, this episode should help you answer questions about what our label means when you see it in the marketplace. Please be sure to join us next week when we're going to interview well-known food systems author Michael Pollan again. His groundbreaking book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, has sold millions of copies since its publication in 2006, and it's still so relevant today. Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm here with Ariel Pressman, the Certification Director at Real Organic Project. Hi, Ariel.
Hi, Linley. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, tell everybody where you're located. We're going to talk a little bit today about the Real Organic Project, how you got started here, and about your origins farming, because everybody on our team has actually farmed before, and why that's so important to us. So let's start with where you are.
Yeah, so I am based out of Minneapolis. I've lived here for the past 4 years that I've been working with Real Organic Project. And before that, I was running and working on certified organic farms in western Wisconsin, about an hour away from the Twin Cities, for 10 plus years.
Let's hear a little bit about that farm. You and I have talked quite a bit about how difficult it is for both vegetable farmers to run a farm, find help, get markets. Describe the farm a little bit first and then talk about the challenges that you had, making it all work.
Yeah, it was, at the time, it was a little bit more of a unique situation, which I think as farming trends have changed is maybe not as unique now. So I guess the very start for me is, I'm a city kid. I was born in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I really never spent any time farming or on farms or doing anything farm related until after college, when I started woofing on a farm in central Vermont. And I think, like a lot of people, a light bulb went off for me. I just really clearly remember literally setting foot on the farm for the first time, this farm I was woofing on, and within 5 seconds thinking, like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
What was the farm in Vermont?
Yeah, it was called Smoky House Center. It was such a cool place. I don't know if they still exist. But basically what they did is, it was one of the largest private land holdings in Vermont. It was a nonprofit. And what happened was, these huge land magnates died in a plane crash and had willed all of their land, if they were to die, to a nonprofit that would start a farm specifically for at-risk youth to work on.
Wow.
So when I was working there, they needed woofers because they literally had so many houses. They just needed people staying in the houses to make sure they didn't fall apart. So I had this giant New England house all to myself. And the main premise of the farm was everything was set up. It was almost like a camp where you had individual farmers. They'd have classes of kids that were largely coming from Rutland, which was kind of the bigger city in the area. And it was a lot of kids that just, had a tough go of things. A lot of kids that were in foster care, didn't have a lot of good adult role models. And getting to go out to the farm and get out their energy and get some good adult role models in their life was like really, really impactful for them. And what was so cool for me about the farm was because it was set up as a nonprofit, so I didn't really need to make money in the same way as like my farm did or your farm would. And also because it was really set up to be a good experience for those kids. It had everything. Like it was a dream for like the first farm you would work on, where it was like, well, do you want to spend the day with the sheep, with the goats, with the pigs, with the cows, with the vegetables? They even had this whole crazy mechanism I've never seen before, I've never seen since, where they would make their own charcoal because they did a lot of maple syrup. And then the little fragments of wood that they didn't want to throw in the boiler for the maple syrup, they had this giant cauldron where they would make like, local charcoal out of, basically. So it was an amazing exposure to just the totality of farming, and in a really nice kind of fully circular way, which I'll get to later. Sue Catt, who was really my first farming mentor, she was the farmer that was running Smoky House Center. She was the reason I moved out to Western Wisconsin. When I was 23, 24, I was kind of ready to journey, and she had told me about this area she used to be farming in and how great it was. So I came out here sight unseen. And further down the line, Sue actually moved back and then has a farm that is now certified with Real Organic Project. So it's so cool that I think in farming we have these small communities, often things kind of come full circle. But I was working at Smoky House Center. I was a woofer, but I tend to be pretty intense about stuff. So I ended up sticking around for like 9 months, working full time there, but just kind of a work trade situation. And then I moved out to Western Wisconsin to work at Foxtail Farm, which is also now Real Organic Project certified. And it was kind of your classic 20-acre CSA farmers market farm, which in this part of the country is really the foundational farm model for so many organic farmers. And they had the added benefit too of having a commercial kitchen. Not so much now, but at the time I was super interested in like, how do you take these vegetables and turn it into a value add? So they were doing frozen pizzas and bread from wheat they would grow on the farm. And it was just such a great exposure to everything. So I worked there for 3 years. They had a really, really cool apprenticeship program, which I think when I was at that point in my farming career, I didn't fully understand how special it was and how lucky I was. But the deal was if you worked there for 2 years, the third year you'd work for them part-time, and then completely at their own cost, you'd get to incubate your own farm on their property. So you get an acre, you could use all their tractors, they would pay for your fertilizer and potting soil. And because of that, Chris and Paul just had such a great track record of starting farms. I actually have kind of a side project I've been working on of trying to put together the Foxtail Farm family tree, which is a lot kind of like Linley when I've heard you talk about these mother tree farms, in different communities that start. And I've been able to track back close to 40 farms directly to Foxtail that have started and are still running. So it's just, not to get too far adrift, but I feel like we often get told as individuals that we can't have an impact. What's the point? What's a single farm going to do in a single person? And it's so cool to see that, as an individual farm, they were able to get an enormous amount of this community going and an enormous amount of, organic produce into people's hands. So I worked there for 2 years, did the incubator the third year, and I very quickly realized that partially because maybe I'm a bit of a contrarian and partially because I just want to be competing with my friends, that the standard kind of CSA farmers market model was not going to be what I wanted to pursue. And so I very quickly started selling to restaurants, and then that turned into selling to school districts and co-ops and Whole Foods and stuff like that. And very quickly over the course of about 3 years, my farm transformed from this kind of, smaller farmers market CSA model into completely wholesale, which I feel like now is actually not that unusual. But at the time, running a 10-acre farm, telling people, this was like 10 years ago, telling people I'm going to do only wholesale, I definitely got told a lot that that was a terrible idea. And maybe it was, but it worked out. And it was really cool to get to forge some new space as a farm and oftentimes show up in stores where by many, many multiples, I'd be the smallest farmer there. But being able to just kind of figure out, this is how I can show up in the space. This is where my niche is. And this is how I can be additive to the community instead of just competing for the same market share, but really just making new market share for local farms in these stores.
It's so great that you recognize that. I think people are surprised to hear that, that really how saturated some communities can be for getting a stand at a farmer's market or finding new CSA customers. There's only so many people in any given community that are willing to kind of find food in this alternative way. And, there's this whole debate of, well, the more the better, a rising tide, raises all ships and, stuff like that. But at the same time, I really feel like that was pretty valuable that you noticed that market was pretty saturated and figured out how to switch over to wholesale. I did sort of the same thing where I worked on a farm in Maine. It was a CSA farm like in the mid 90s, Bambi Jones, Hidden Valley Farm. It was a wonderful place to start. And I thought, I've got all this experience. I can go start my own farm. And it was pretty different, working on someone else's farm when they got, they do all the behind the scenes planning that you just have no idea, the marketing, all that stuff, and then shifting over to owning your own farm. Like, what were some of the shocks that you experienced in the transition to running your own farm?
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, I feel like it's funny. It's just like the mind of a really young person. But I thought after, if I'm being really honest, I'm embarrassed to admit this now, even after I woofed for 6 months, in my own head, I was pretty like, all right, I get it. I know how to run a farm. Like, it can't be that hard. And, now, even with my 10 years of farming experience plus, I have the more I know, the more I realize I don't know very much, and that's, I think, one of the attractions of farming is that you're a lifelong learner. You're never going to know even half of what you should know. But yeah, I just wanted to go, before I talk about that, I just wanted to say that I think what's so cool about this idea of creating more space in the community, what always really stuck with me was Chris and Paul at Foxtail. One of their lines they would give all the apprentices was, "We will fully support you in anywhere you want to go, even if it's technically competing with us. But it is on you to create new market space." So they'd always say, go anywhere you want, but don't show up at our farmers market, and not because we don't like competition, but because every farmer should have a little bit of an impetus to, like, your contribution to the community should be growing this pie a little bit.
Don't show up at our farmers market that's a little harsh. Maybe there's a lot more farmers markets. There's only one here in my community, so that would be hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here, but it's also for them, I think part of the point they were making, which is really well taken, is they were in a very, very small community. We're talking about a farmer's market with 4 vendors that had just been totally bootstrapped. And, it was 10 years of putting into that market for them to make it into something profitable. And it was incredible. I mean, I'd work that farm stand for them. They'd make more money in this small town at a 4-vendor farmer's market than I would make at one of the really nice farmer's markets in Minneapolis. And it was because they spent years building those connections. And I think that was the implicit point they were trying to make to all of us. Wasn't that competition is bad or stay away or anything like that, but it was just that we're all joining a really unique community. And it's one of the only business communities I'm aware of, maybe the only one, where people are actively training people who could be their competition and doing so at their own expense, right? I mean, Foxtail lost money letting me be an apprentice there. And so the whole point is like, okay, you've been given something, and instead of just taking, you now need to give back in return. So I always really liked that idea, and I took it pretty seriously that, some markets are obvious and a lot of people are going to compete for them. I mean, it's not some brilliant idea that I tried to sell produce to the local co-op, but other markets, the markets I was honestly more proud of servicing, were the ones that had no local vendor. There was a big distributor near me that didn't carry any local organic produce. And I took so much pride in working with them because I was like, I was literally displacing all of this stuff traveling across the country with something local. And I was creating a new market space for local organic farmers. And it was cool to see that now, even with me leaving, I have friends that are now filling that space. So it hasn't just gone away. It's now, like, hopefully permanently part of the system. But yeah, I think to get back to your other question, I think it's just like infinite hard lessons, I think the biggest one for me was, it's the classic farmer question. It's like, yeah, you can grow it, and growing it is obviously very complicated and hard, but marketing and selling it is no joke. I mean, even at a 15-acre farm, which is in the grand scheme of things not much, it was so easy to inundate the market. We'd go, okay, I'm growing an acre of cucumbers, which, depending on your context, might sound like a ton of cucumbers or not very many cucumbers. But in the grand scheme of things, it's certainly not that much. And, an acre of cucumbers might yield, 20,000 pounds of cucumbers in a year. It's really hard to find enough markets for 20,000 pounds of cucumbers. You might max out where you're at with just 1 acre. So I think I was really surprised by that. And I think the other thing I was really surprised by was just how difficult it can be to be in that kind of ag of the middle space. Running 15 acres of produce for me, we were way too big to be doing these kind of human scale production methods that people like Elliott Coleman and JM48 have advocated for. But I was also way too small to move into getting all of this really cool equipment that I see when I visit these bigger farms in California. So trying to kind of navigate that space of like, how can we be efficient? How can we design tools that work really well for us without breaking the bank? Was just extremely, difficult in a really fun and good and challenging way, but it was definitely difficult.
Well, and also make it all work economically at wholesale prices, which a lot of the reasons why this works economically for so many small farms is their direct marketing at a retail price.
Yeah, I think with the pricing, what I found was, and I know this will be different for everybody, but I found that for starters, I think oftentimes people are under the impression they're getting a better direct to market price than they actually are. So like, for example, I used to do farmers markets for years. And when I really started doing the math on my farmer's market, what everybody who does markets knows is you got to bring more than you're going to sell because nobody's ever going to buy the last 2 bunches of anything. So I was like, okay, in a good day, I'm selling 75% of what I bring. And I'm bringing 25% home and composting it. So the reality is I'm not actually getting that market price. Like I'm not getting $3 a bunch for kale. I'm getting 3/4 of $3 a bunch for kale. And what I realized was that kind of made my farmer's market like a not very good wholesale customer, because I was spending all day there. You don't know if you're going to make the money or not. But yeah, when I was moving into these more kind of traditional wholesale markets, I think what I found was you just can't do everything for everybody. And that's not a problem. I think so often both vendors and farmers approach it with like, well, either you can buy everything on my farm at the price I need, or this isn't going to work. And what I found with like Russ Davis Wholesale, the distributor I worked with, was there were some crops like kale, like cucumbers and zucchini, where I could get a really fair price and they weren't paying me much more than they were used to. There were other crops like cabbage or onions where there was no way I could afford to do it for the price they could pay. But I think what was really fun was as I got to know them better and we could kind of navigate this relationship, it was a matter of, okay, you don't need to buy everything. That's okay. Onions might just be something you get from California or somewhere else, but I could be your vendor for kale and cucumbers and zucchini. The other thing I found is that when you're doing wholesale well, which I think for mean different for everybody, but it looks so different for different people in terms of what is going to be cost effective. So for me, going to a place like Russ Davis Wholesale, yes, I was absolutely getting a lower price than I'd get going to a co-op or a farmer's market, but in turn, I just had to bring a truck once, with like 8 pallets of produce on it, and it was done. And the amount of cost savings I was getting from that more than made up for the fact that I wasn't always getting the exact same price that I'd get from a co-op. So yeah, it's really complicated, but I think I really encourage people when they're getting into this space, just really think actively about what's actually going to work and price out for you and what's not. And if something's not, you've just got to be willing to leave it, which is really hard. I think as farmers, we're all really kind of naturally ambitious people. It's hard to tell a Whole Foods, you're willing to buy 5 acres of onions from me, but maybe not at the right price, so I'm not going to do it. But I think needing to have that inner conviction of knowing I've got to do what's best for myself and my farm, and that's sometimes going to mean saying no, I think is so important in kind of setting up those good wholesale relationships.
Ariel, I've got to ask because you actually were able to sell your farm with all the markets attached to it. Do you think that marketing has gotten better at the wholesale level or worse since you sold your farm? We have so much interaction with farms and farmers and, with the Real Organic Project. And what I've witnessed is that, the price point hasn't changed or even has gotten lower. And at the wholesale level, and a lot of farms that have been marketing for decades wholesale are losing their markets. I'm wondering if maybe Minneapolis, St. Paul is kind of an island of sanity, and that's not going on there. What have you been hearing kind of in your area in terms of, or even across the country, in terms of whether or not this model is still working, or if if the wholesale market is getting even more consolidated and all the issues we talk about at the Real Organic Project are actually affecting farmers?
Yeah, I do think there are pieces of the Twin Cities market that just are special. We have more co-ops per capita by a mile in the Twin Cities than anywhere else in the country, which naturally means there's more markets for small farmers than maybe where you're at, Linley, where there might just be one co-op and everybody's fighting over that limited shelf space. Both the farms that I sold my business to are certified with us, and I stay in touch with them. From what I've heard, they've only expanded pretty significantly the amount of business they're doing with these places, which is music to my ears. I love hearing it. But But no, I think to my mind, it's a matter of scale. I think there's a lot of different types of wholesale, and I'm not begrudging any of it, but I just think there's pluses and minuses. I think if you're doing wholesale at the scale of some of the farms we work with in California, where you need to be able to sell and market hundreds of acres worth of produce, you are by definition going to need release valves with markets that are more customers than partners. And I always kind of break this down for people when I'm doing like trainings on wholesale. You know, a small farm can't afford to have a customer because a customer only really cares if they're making or losing money. They don't care about your business. A partner does. So when I think about the places I was working with, everything from, you know, the co-ops to the buyers at the Whole Foods to even that large, wholesale warehouse, Russ Davis, they had their limits, but they genuinely cared about me. You know, they genuinely, when I stopped farming, it was funny. It felt like I was like breaking up with people. You know, that's how emotional those conversations were when I told people I was getting out. And I couldn't ask for anything more, really. Not that that was pleasant, but like these were real relationships and people were invested in me and invested in the farm. And I think once you move out of that, once you start saying, hey, I'm just shipping a truck of produce to the Chicago terminal market, you're now all of a sudden, if the prices drop, nobody's going to sit there and go, okay, can we pencil it out to make sure Ariel still makes enough money to pay his employees? They're just going, great, I got it cheaper. And so I think that once you're at a scale where you need to service those types of markets, that's where we're seeing a lot of that consolidation and a lot of those issues, because you're just at the whims of these market forces that are way larger than you could ever control. But I think for farms that are able to work with those smaller markets and those markets that are really value oriented, I think they're still doing really well. Now, I will say it's way more competitive than it used to be in this space. I mean, like I said, when I started, there really weren't other people at my size trying to even get into these markets. So I really didn't have that much competition. In the same way, when I talked to farmers who started doing CSA 25 years ago, the world was their oyster. And now there's like a million CSA farms. It's so much harder to find the customers. So I totally agree with you that I think consolidation is a really big issue. But I think that if people hopefully are able to set themselves up with partners instead of customers, that's not going to affect them as much. And I think that's one of the advantages we have as smaller farmers, is that economically we can afford to kind of cobble together these partners instead of just having to go to these massive customers.
You and I are two examples of people that are promoting the small farm revolution. We used to farm and we're no longer doing it. I think both of us experienced body kind of rejection of farming. Like we just overdid it. And so, and I remember on Bambi Jones's farm, she was in her mid 40s, which is where I'm at now. And she couldn't be in the field because her back hurt. I think she's since transitioned to farming trees or something, because it's up like this. And, our farm does a lot more trellis tomatoes and cukes and things like that, where we can be upright. But that would be what I would talk to farmers about now that are getting started. It's like, don't abuse your body. It won't last, your ability to continue to work like you do. What's some of your advice to young farmers based on your experience in terms of work-life balance? And things?
I 100% agree with that. And I would actually expand that to say, don't abuse your body or your mind. I think the physical abuse from farming can be really readily apparent, and it's pretty obvious from the tasks we're doing. I mean, I'm just like you, Linley. I had, there were a lot of reasons I got out of farming, but one of them was, I had one point been referred for back surgery. I had days where if I had to get out of my bed in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I might have had to crawl. It was that bad. And the only way I was going to be able to let my body recover was to stop farming. And I think so much of that could have been avoided if I'd taken these small steps, which at the time didn't seem like something I could do. But I know in retrospect I could have, just like, okay, my back is killing me. I got to take some time to let it recover. But instead, I just pushed through, figured I've got to do it. And then the consequences are, of course, like you reap what you sow down the line. But I think the other really big thing I want to make sure folks understand, especially younger farmers, because I think often there's a sense of almost invincibility. I certainly had it when I was like 24 or 25, that you can just keep doing all of this stuff in perpetuity. It's also a mental, emotional thing. And I think that's something that I'm so glad to see is getting talked about more in our community, but I think is still something that we don't talk about nearly enough. And it's something a lot of people feel very shy to talk about, is that this is extraordinarily emotionally draining work. It can be very isolating work. And I think needing to set yourself up so you don't burn out down the line, which means that you need to like feed your community, you need to feed your family, your relationships. I still have this very vivid memory of the first year I was farming when I was incubating at Foxtail, and my grandmother passed away, and her funeral was on a Sunday, and I found out on a Friday, and my first reaction was, well, I got to go to the farmer's market before I can go to the funeral, and that's just so indicative to me of a mindset that was just eventually going to lead to burnout, which is when you're putting the farm above just everything, you don't have anything to lean back on. So I just really encourage people when, especially younger farmers, but anybody, no matter where they are, take care of your body, but also take care of your mind, and recognize the fact that if you want to be doing this for the long term, if you want to be doing the most good by being able to farm for your whole career, you have to start thinking early. Because by the time you get to where I was, 33, 34, 35, your body's broken down, you're emotionally, mentally not doing too well. It's unfortunately kind of too late. You need to start servicing those things early in your career so you're well prepared and you're ready as you get later in your career. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Linley, and I think farming is so much more than just how you take care of the soil and the animals. I mean, that's obviously important, but there's so much more to making it a long-term kind of sustainable gig for all of us.
Yeah, and just kind of understanding all the issues that farmers face is so important to our certification program. So kind of talk about our team and why we only hire past farmers, and even kind of what it's like to get certified with the Real Organic Project. What do we do when we're there?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that really, really differentiates us is that we are a farmer-led movement, and we're not a farmer-led movement in name. It's genuinely everybody working in certification has significant farming experience. They've either run their own farms, they've worked on farms for a couple of years, but it's so important to us that when we show up to farms, we share that lived experience. I think I've had this happen so many times. I show up to a farm, you can see people are a little tense because I think they're expecting this kind of like bureaucratic experience. They're expecting somebody that may have some level of judgment, about why is the farm so messy? Why are there weeds? Why are you just dressed in clothing that's really dirty? Like whatever. And I think when I tell people, hey, I get it. I did this for a long time. I fully understand your situation. I mean, I don't want to over exaggerate. You can literally see people's shoulders like relax, and people open up more. And I think that's such a good part of the reason that we want to be a farmer-led movement is, there are parts of farming I think you'll never be able to understand if you haven't had that lived experience. So being able to show up and share that with them and understand it is so important. And it leads to, I think a lot of important, really good grassroots type conversations about trying to understand people and their farms holistically. Because I think one of the things that makes us really unique as a certification program is we don't separate out the certification from the community building, from the politics. I think to us, those things are all one and the same. And I think you can see it when you're on the farm. And I've had so many, for every good conversation I've had with people about their cover cropping practices, about their pasturing processes, about all of that, I've had the same number of really amazing conversations with people about their families, about mental health, about where they see the role in the community, about their fears around climate change. And I think that's so important that when we're going to the farm, we're not just saying, let's take a checklist, let's just check the boxes, not have a conversation about the why, but just the what, and then move on, because I think people don't feel as seen in that process. And that's why oftentimes people don't want to participate. So yeah, for our certification program, I always tell people it's almost the exact opposite of your experience with like an NOP inspection, where, when the NOP shows up, and I know it differs a lot depending on who shows up, but in general, it's gonna be much more based around paperwork. I remember when I was a certified organic farmer, I'd say 90% of the time I'd spend on the inspection was at the kitchen table, going through receipts, going through paperwork and all of that. For us, we want to take the exact opposite viewpoint, which is, to my mind, the best way to know what's going on the farm. Not that paperwork isn't important, but I think the best way to truly know what's happening is you've got to be in the field with people who are experienced enough to know what they're looking at. So when I show up to a vegetable farm, I guess I could spend an hour looking through all their records and receipts, but I'm going to learn so much more just walking around the field with them. So what I always tell people when I show up is, treat this like a farm tour. Show me around, show me everything, show me what you're proud of, you're not proud of. I'm going to ask you the questions I need to ask to make sure that you meet our standards. But in the end of the day, like I want you to be relaxed, and I want you to be showing me who you are, what the farm is, the why of both. And I find that to be not only more valuable from a certification perspective, because I've definitely found that when people get relaxed and they get to know you, you're definitely going to get the truth a lot more. But I think it's also so much more effective from this community movement building perspective, where I think that's something that at times we've lost in certified organic as it's become bigger and bigger and bigger. And as more and more what we see on the shelf is coming from not necessarily family scale farms, but corporate entities, is this sense of community. And I think so many of us got into this because we were attracted, myself included, because we were attracted to the sense of community, to the sense of all of us caring about each other, working towards common goals. So I really think that when we show up to farms with Real Organic Project and show up in that way, my highest aspiration is that we are filling people's cup, not just from a certification perspective, but from a community perspective as well, to really help connect everybody, help people feel seen, and really be able to kind of find our common values and move forward together as a community.
Yeah, I think the fact that we were farmers means that we understand that the farmers are giving us an hour of their time and how valuable that is. And it's another reason why our certification program is free, because we all feel like, gosh, there's so much burden as an add-on just to get certified USDA, financial and time-wise, that's the last thing that we want to do is add on another fee to run a program that really we feel the USDA should be checking these boxes. So
Absolutely.
First of all, what are the boxes that you're checking? What are you looking for when you're there?
Yeah, and first of all, I just want to say the previous thing. I always tell people, I mean, I love my job, but I shouldn't need to have this job, right? I mean, if the USDA was doing their job, this wouldn't be necessary. So when we show up, kind of the boxes we're checking is, we're basically just trying to make sure that everything that got said in the application checks out when we get to the farm. So what we're doing is we're verifying that information. So for example, Linley, if I went to your farm and you had told me on your application, I have 100 chickens, I get there and go, oh, that looks like a barn that could have 10,000 chickens in it. That's stuff that we need to confirm because again, we want to trust, but what we're doing is also verifying. But largely the big kind of ticket items that we look at on a farm are one, that farmers are growing in healthy, biologically active soil that they are actively working to improve. And that's what that active improvement looks like is going to be different depending on the farmer and the part of the country. If they have animals, we are making sure that those animals are actually on a pasture-based system and have real outdoor access. So again, not that they could have outdoor access, but we're really looking for evidence that those animals are outdoors, they are on real pasture, and they're being treated humanely. And for what it's worth, we even check with farms if they have animals that are not certified organic. They don't have to meet the Real Organic standards, but we want to make sure that they're at least being treated in a way that I'd consider to be humane and respectful, which means they're not under systemic confinement, they're not being given preventative antibiotics, things like that. And that leads to kind of the other section of what we do, which is we're so unique in that we're a whole farm certification. So anybody who's NOP certified knows they will show up and they will do different scopes on your farm. You could say, hey, I want to get that bed of radish certified, but not that bed of radish certified. As long as the certifier feels okay that they're not going to get commingled or confused, you can do that. For us, we want to look at the whole farm. So, we don't allow any parallel production, which means you can't grow the same crop, organic and conventional. We have rules around how much of the production has to be certified organic. Because again, the idea is, I think when the average eater buys a bottle of certified organic milk, I think they are rightfully so under the impression that those cows have been raised on pasture and that what they are supporting with their dollars is organic agriculture. Not that they're supporting some very small subsidiary of a larger corporation where they work the cows so hard in the organic farm that then they just jack them up on antibiotics and then kick them over to the conventional farm. So I think so much what we're doing is also trying to meet the common sense expectations of people that would buy our products. The last piece that we do is we have what we call worker welfare standards. So I'm always want to be very clear and transparent. It's not fair labor standards. But the whole idea is when we go to the farm, we want to make sure to bare minimum that people are being treated respectfully. So what that means is we interview the employees. If housing is provided by the employers, we look at the housing. We kind of have checklists of what we're looking for and what we're talking to people about. It's not perfect, but I think centering workers as part of a functioning organic farm that has integrity is so important. Because I always tell people, there's nothing about labor in the National Organic Program. I mean, that means you could quite literally have a farm that does a lot of cover cropping and got cited for slave labor. They get that USDA seal. And what we're saying is, to have a sustainable system, people have to be treated sustainably too. So we have a lot of work to do as a community on that, just a larger farming community, not just organic. But we really want to make sure to center that as well when we're going to the farms.
I remember we had this long conversation about this standard, and I said, well, what about all these CSA farms that have volunteer labor in exchange for food? And I've got this group of volunteers that comes and just bags lettuce because it's really fun, and they can come and go, as they want. So it's, how do we distinguish between with this worker welfare, a situation, or even housing? Like sometimes people pitch tents in our yard, right? So how do we distinguish kind of this, I want to be here versus I'm in a bad situation?
You totally hit the nail on the head with, it's so hard to parse out these things because there are situations on one farm that just from an ethical standpoint might seem totally acceptable, right? I mean, if some college kids called you up, Linley, and went, can we work for a couple hours and pitch a tent on your farm? That's very, very different than if a lot of people came here with no money from another country and no documents and have been told you have to live in the woods in tents while you're working here 80 hours a week. So from a standards perspective, it's so hard. How do you write a standard that acknowledges those are different situations, but it's also enforceable? So to your question, what we've done is we've talked to a lot of other certification bodies and folks that work in this space to kind of develop our standards. And what we've decided on is, so for volunteer labor, we kind of define what is a volunteer, and we say that's not part of our labor standards. We're recognizing that's different. If somebody is an apprentice or an intern, what we basically say is that either has to be a legal apprenticeship, meaning it has to be something they're getting college credit for, it has to be registered with the state, which is pretty uncommon, or there has to be a formal learning plan that they can submit. And that means that we have evidence that you're not just calling this an apprenticeship to get out of paying somebody a legal wage, but it's a genuine learning apprenticeship. As far as housing, I think we came up with a standard I really like, which I think is an interesting one, which is there's basic services people must be able to access, right? So, if somebody's living in a yurt, I'm actually thinking of one farm we certify where like the yurts are nicer than my apartment, but they're a yurt. But what we're saying is, okay, we know you might not be able to stick a bathroom in the yurt. The person needs easy, reliable access to a bathroom. They need easy, reliable access to potable water, all that type of stuff. And what we say is that if it's non-standard housing, meaning anything that's not, what me and you would consider a normal house or apartment, the standard is that the farmer has to make it clear in the job posting before somebody was employed that they were, getting into non-standard housing. Because I think, again, if somebody wants to live on that yurt, and if that's a good situation for them, and we agree that it's a safe, reliable structure, I have no issue with that. But what we don't want is somebody showing up to the farm thinking they were going to be living in a house and then told, hey, there's a nice yurt in the woods. So yeah, it can get intensely complicated, honestly. And we have a complicated community and a complicated history with labor in our community, because we have everything from, probably what people are unfortunately well aware of historically so many labor abuses in agriculture, to this history in organic agriculture with CSAs of having, work shares and apprenticeships be a really important piece of why this community has been able to be built. And I think we're now kind of, maturing as a community to a point where I'm much, much more seeing, the vast majority of jobs now are, they're paying a wage, you're providing housing, it's set up more like a quote unquote normal job, as opposed to like when I was starting to farm, 14 years ago, I'd say it was actually the opposite. The vast majority of farms I was looking at were doing some kind of apprenticeship model. And I still remember so clearly going to interview on a farm in Maine, I don't remember their name, but getting basically told that I'd get paid, like $200 a month and I'd have to live in a tent. And they brought me out to the field where the tent would be. And it turned out I'd not only be living in a tent, I'd be sharing a tent with somebody. So that's the type of stuff where we go, okay, people just need to know what they're getting themselves into. And we do have to draw some lines around what we think are just appropriate situations for workers on a farm. But I just want to say the flip side, which I never anticipated from having these labor standards, is I get to talk to the farm workers, which is amazing. Because the reality is when you go to a farm, there's not just one or two farmers. I mean, if we're really having an all-encompassing term here, anybody doing the work of the farm is a farmer. So it's so cool to get to interact with the other farmers when I'm there, getting to hear people's stories, getting to hear their experiences, And even just through the work we do at Real Organic Project, getting to hear what do they think about what we're doing? What are their aspirations if they were to start a farm? Do they find what we're doing important? So it's really cool to get that opportunity to interact with so many different layers of the operation of a farm, and yeah, just get to make friends and allies as we go.
Ariel, anybody that gets NOP certified is going to see that this is a really different process. And we got a lot of criticism when we first got started that we didn't have enough rigor, that because whatever rigor is, but whatever this, paperwork trail, that we weren't doing that. And we had a different approach, that there wasn't going to be integrity in our program. And when we started to look at the numbers, we were seeing, we're rejecting 15% or something like that of the farms that apply with us. And then I started asking other NOP certifiers. I was like, well, how many do you reject? And it was like less than 1%. So we started to see that this kind of, and it's different because we're an add-on. And we know that this work has already been done of looking at the receipts, and this farm is now certified organic. But we did get this accusation of being an add-on label, that we didn't have the rigor. So kind of what's your response to that, basically, given our ability to just kind of say, no, that you actually didn't meet this checklist, and we could see that within an hour, and the number of farms that we're rejecting from the program, how much higher it is.
Yeah, I think there's so many things to that. I mean, the first is, Dave has said it so well before. If you talk to people that were part of the certified organic movement in the early days, 80s, 90s, the amount of paperwork and bureaucracy was so much less. Yet it seems like everybody agrees the integrity was so much higher. So Dave's point he always brings up is like, okay, now the bureaucracy and the paperwork are higher. Is the integrity higher than it used to be? No. So that probably tells us that bureaucracy and paperwork is not essential to the integrity of a program. And again, I don't mean that to impugn the way things work. I think there's a lot of reasons that the NOP works the way it does. I think there's a lot of amazing certifiers out there which really do their due diligence when they go out to farms. But I think what I have found going out to these farms is that the reality that anybody who's done the certified organic paperwork knows is that if you want to commit fraud, with paperwork, it's frankly not that hard, right? I mean, if I was spraying an herbicide I'm not supposed to spray, or a pesticide, the idea that then I'd show that to my NOP inspector and get caught is pretty silly. So I think there's that piece where when you're looking at paperwork in this aspect, right, you're not the IRS where you can just see everybody's records that got filed, but where we're just voluntarily looking what people give us, we're naturally going to be pretty deficient in our ability to catch fraud. It's more that we're going to be able to help guide people and say, hey, did you know you're not allowed to use that? You should really be using this. But I think when we actually go out to the farms, I always push back and I say I think there's a lot of rigor to what we do. I just think the rigor is through a different lens. The rigor is going out to the farm, getting to know the farmers, literally getting to see the crops in the field, getting to understand why they grow things. I think some really good advice I got from Harriet Behar about when we were getting trained for dairy farms was this very kind of like qualitative thing. I mean, you can go out, you of course should look at the cows, you look at the pasture, you look at the records. But one of the best clues for me when I go out is just talk to people about their system, about their grazing system. If you're talking to somebody that's doing rotational grazing and they've been doing rotational grazing for 20 years, I mean, the amount of knowledge in their head that they want to empty to tell you about is unbelievable. And I think then, not to say that person couldn't be making it up, I guess, but the proof's kind of in the pudding through having that conversation, through being out in the field, through seeing how people interact, and just doing these observations. And so, I genuinely feel like through the lens of bureaucracy, we're a lot lighter than the NOP. Although I do want to say we do have, we have checklists, we have specific items we're looking for, we record the paperwork, we do all the stuff you'd want a certifier to do, but we just don't feel like burying people in more bureaucracy is meaningful. And I would argue it's not respectful to kind of the limited time and resources of the farmer. I've unfortunately talked to farmers who have told me their NOP inspectors didn't even go into the field. They just looked at their paperwork. And to my mind, that I know that's not broadly what happens, but that just feels shameful. I mean, there's no way to feel and see the whole story of a farm just through the records. So yeah, I totally hear it. And I think we're always open to new ideas and criticisms and new ways to do things. But we've really chosen our lens to be largely through relationships and through observation and less through kind of paperwork and records.
Ariel, we hear almost on a daily basis from farmers that this is the way a certification program should run. We have a very tiny budget, which is one of the reasons why we've chosen to remain an add-on. But and we lose 10% of our farms because they choose to drop USDA certification every year. So why have we chosen to remain an add-on? We get asked that question a lot.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I always tell people too, it's always, I don't think we're going to change it anytime soon, but it's always an active, since the day I started Linley, I think between me, you, and Dave, and really anybody else that's been on staff, it's always been an active conversation. I think there's a couple reasons. So you hit on one, which is we are a very limited resource organization. We don't want to represent ourselves as doing things that we can't or don't do. So by being an add-on, we can lean on the fact that the NOP is not doing, I sometimes hate people get the idea that we're saying in any way that everything the NOP is doing is wrong or anything like that. I don't think that's the case at all. The reality is that we just feel like things should be done differently in places and enforced differently in places. So we can rely on the fact that we know those inspectors have looked at the paperwork, they've checked the receipts. We have the exact same rules on things like inputs as the NOP, so that's all good for us if it's already been checked. And then that really frees us up to spend the time actually on the farm. If we were doing both, we would either need significantly more resources, like many, many, many more multiples of what we have, or we'd have to have a very different type of program. So that's one reason where it's just the resources. The second reason is that I always tell people, I think of the NOP as like a friend or a family member. It's a thing we have a relationship with. And if a friend or family member is in trouble, you don't jump ship, you stick around to try to help. And I think the USDA organic program is something that has so much inherent value in it, both as a marketing tool and as a certification tool, that we really want to help stick around and make sure we can make it better and make sure it has more integrity rather than just kind of completely reinventing the wheel. Because from a marketing standpoint, you couldn't ask for anything better. I mean, I can't think of anything else where you can just slap a logo on it and almost to the point of fault, eaters will go, yes, I want to buy that and I'm willing to pay more for it. So we don't want to abandon that, and we want to respect the fact that there's been so much hard work put into it over the years by so many people that helped found the Real Organic Project. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons, and I think it's something we're always keeping a close eye on to make sure we're reevaluating what we're doing and make sure we still feel like we're doing a good job. But I think so much of what we're doing and what makes us unique is that we want to build on top of the work that's already been done, not replace the work. And I think that's an essential kind of function of how we operate.
Ariel, I think what drew both of us to this job and many of the people that work with us are the pioneering farmers that we sort of looked up to, have kind of built the organic movement from the beginning and have been around forever. Either we're losing market share themselves, losing shelf space, or just, their farms were succeeding, but they just knew that the organic industry was very different. Things were getting certified that don't represent the way that they farm and the movement that they built. And they were at a point in their lives where they're starting to retire, and either they're not able to hand a successful farm off to the next generation because the markets just aren't there, or their life's work, they were seeing that it didn't really turn out the way that they had intended for it to be. And so maybe talk a little bit about the inspiration of the group of people that are behind this movement, and where we are as a program as well, to kind of finish up here. Like, how many farms have joined us, and how much success we've seen just in 5 years of operating.
Well, I mean, on a personal level, it's a dream. I mean, I often tell farmers I interact with, I feel like I did my life in reverse. I farmed for 10 years and then I got to go see the farms for all the best farmers in the country. It is on a regular basis, I have to fight the urge to just start a farm again, just so I can incorporate all of the knowledge I've gotten from these amazing farmers. But I also think on this emotional, philosophical level, Linley, me and you talked about this. I'm thinking about the talk Drew from Full Belly gave at the EcoFarm pre-conference we did.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a bit of a skeptical person these days. I think I'm not as easily moved as I used to be. And I just had goosebumps the whole time she was talking.
We are on the right path. Yes.
Absolutely. And I think sharing space with people like Drew, who not only have such incredible values, but have lived those values for their entire life. I mean, with people, like, it's not talk. She's got the evidence, right? And to see how much work people like Drew and Paul and so many other people that we work with have done into making this a community of integrity, to see how much they care, it just really motivates me to want to we got to pick up that mantle. We have to make sure that the next generation of farmers, the next generation of eaters, has all the benefits of the previous generation. So yeah, it's been unbelievable. And I have to say, one of the things that's been so cool for me is there are people like Paul and Drew I knew of, but I never met before, Ellie Coleman, kind of the bigger names in our community. But one of the things I've learned through this job is there's this whole quiet class of farmers that also could be like that. They just, I don't know, they don't want to put themselves out there. They just want to hang out on their farm or whatever. But I can't tell you how many farms I've been to, and I've just had this thought of, you should be famous. You should be famous for how good you are at farming, for how good you are at thinking, for philosophizing, for community organizing. So it's been so cool to get to meet those farms too. And I don't know how else I would have been able to do that, but to have a job like this. So as far as where we're at now as a program, it's really incredible to see. I mean, Linley, when you started, the program was really like a 3-month-long road trip in 60 farms, and which was incredible. And now to see that grow to over 1,000 farms across the country, with every type of production imaginable. I mean, again, just on a very personal basis, never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd have an avocado farmer in Morro Bay that I consider friends, that I can go and visit, or dairy farmers in northern Minnesota or grain farmers in North Dakota. It's just incredible to see the breadth of our community, because I think for me, not unlike a lot of people, I was a diversified vegetable farmer. My community were the people immediately around me doing kind of the same things I was. And it's been so cool to see what this work and what this mission looks like through the lens of so many different people, through so many different industries, so many different regions. It's incredibly motivating to me to get to see the hard work that folks are doing all over the place. So yeah, like I said, we have over 1,000 farms across the country. It's growing every single year. So it's really cool to just see the movement and the growth, and the fact that it's coming from, this real grassroots feeling. The honest fact is nobody needs to get certified with us, which I think makes it all the more valuable from a community building, from a philosophical perspective, because people are doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they believe in it, not because their hand has been forced. And I think it's a really cool thing to see that community form.
Yeah, and fundraising for this program, just to keep it free to the farmers, it's kind of been difficult to get funding, because there is so much now that's going towards beginning farmers and making sure that new farmers succeed. And I think the piece that we're missing in all those programs is, well, once these farmers kind of get started, they get their land to farm on, whether it's rent or own, but like a more permanent situation, what is keeping them from succeeding after that? And there's a lot. And the biggest thing, we talked about it a lot, is just success in the marketplace, as there's been so much consolidation. Really, a lot of farms either can't find an entrance place into a community because there's already enough farms for direct marketing there. So we really do need to find that wholesale space. And, just seeing kind of that second stage of okay, now I know what I'm doing. Can I survive and make a living as a farmer? And I feel like that's where the Real Organic Project is so needed, because the system, you convert to organic, but the system isn't there to really support more organic farms that aren't these mega operations that can, have this year-long dominance on the shelf. And the need for that USDA organic label in order to kind of provide a marketplace, so many farmers depend on that in order to succeed. So walking away, starting another label, it just feels like a loss of 50 years of consumer recognition of what organic means, and it's really, like Emily Oakley said, handing it on a silver platter to the industry that kind of degraded the standards and didn't change the way they farm in order to get that organic premium. So I believe so much in what we're doing for success of the movement of young farmers to just, continue to farm throughout their career. I really believe you need to support kind of the next stage here.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that's such a good point, that if all of the farmers of integrity and good practices left certified organic, the only ones left will be the ones without integrity, and the eaters will be none the wiser. So I think it's so important that we stick around and really help kind of, rescue what's so important. And I think to your point, it will always be virtually impossible for farms to succeed if they're competing with things somewhere between not what they seem and fraudulent products. And I think I just want to say, me and you have talked about this often. We can see this in certain industries. Like, we don't have that many egg operations we work with. And the reason is because the vast, I don't know the number, but like the vast majority of certified organic eggs are clearly coming from CAFO confinement environments. And if you're somebody that's pasture raising your eggs and needs literally double, maybe triple the price of those CAFO eggs, the writing's on the wall. And we've seen that with dairy as well. We've seen that with grain and grain fraud. So I always just really make sure to point out to people, this is not a victimless crime. I mean, there's a lot of things we talk about that are, genuinely valuable as far as philosophically, how should organic food be raised? How can we be transparent? But I think there's a danger that people hear this as thinking this is only a philosophical argument. And the reality is, we know these farmers, Linley. We know farmers that have lost their businesses to the issues we're talking about. And if we don't push back, the momentum will just continue to lead to the good actors going out of business and the bad actors getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I just think it's so important that we organize ourselves to push back, to really create space for the farmers doing the right thing and kind of creating the community we want to have.
Yeah, Hugh Kent's farm, when he talks about allowing an industrial practice, essentially mandates it because it's so much cheaper and we just can't compete. That's always hit hard. Would you maybe mention a little bit about that kind of other side of the program that's not certification, that the Real Organic Project does, this outward-facing educational work?
Yeah, we do so much, which I think is so cool. I really feel like this organization, it's not just of farmers, it really feels like it's run by farmers, because we have so many projects going on all the time. So outside of the certification, we do a lot of education both for farmers and the public. So the biggest one is, what you spend so much time on, Linley, is the symposium every year, where we do somewhere 2 to 3 sessions. It's almost like a documentary film where we're splicing together interviews with farmers and activists and scientists on different issues and really trying to lay out things in a linear fashion, So like last year, for example, I think the symposium session on the dairy industry, even for somebody like me that's probably more studied than most in this, was really illuminating, getting to see it all lined up. Okay, this is what happened. This has been the effect. These are the actors. So we do that. Obviously, we're doing what we do right now, where we've got the podcast. There's a weekly newsletter. We've just started doing these fellow farmer training sessions where we have farmers in our community do specific training sessions for other farmers, either in our community or not. And we also do so much work trying to create some collateral for the farmers and understanding it's not, it shouldn't be on them. So, when a farmer gets certified with us, we've got stickers, we've got brochures, you can kind of see this like sign behind me, this corrugated plastic one that people use at farm stands, really trying to make it as easy as possible. And what I know we're both excited about, Linley, is we've got this new shiny website coming in a couple months too, which I think is going to be a really incredible communication tool to be able to explain to people, whether you're a farmer or whether you're just a general member of the public, like, this is why this matters. This is why you need to support this.
Yeah, and I know you and I have always been really passionate about, because we have such lifelong organic farmers in our community, it's how do we disseminate all of that information so that those skills are there for the next generation to use. And I know that there's, just the value of hearing Francis Tickey talk about Radiance Dairy and his grazing, and, how we can, I think our YouTube channel is really taking off, and, just post little 2-minute clips of advice, from some of these like incredible farmers that are in our community.
It's an embarrassment of riches. I mean, I remember at one point, I don't really remember what it was, but we had like Dave and like Paul and Drew from Full Belly and a couple other people on stage, and I was like counting it up. I was like, we literally have 200 years of farming experience on stage right now. That's unbelievable, the knowledge to be gleaned and shared. So I honestly think what's so exciting to me, Linley, is I think we're only at the start of figuring out how to leverage all that knowledge and how to be able to share it out, which just means there's so much more exciting stuff we're going to get to do in the future to kind of, build the community and make sure that all that hard-earned knowledge, gets to get shared and disseminated and passed down.
Yeah, but even the young farmers that we visit, the fairly new farmers, everybody's got something really cool that they've invented on their farm. And so we've talked about this idea of farm hack. Like, I'm really proud of the way that I graphed. It was kind of just like a home invented, got a humidifier underneath a tent. And, so we're hoping that, we can kind of, build kind of the community, not just the farmers that have been around forever, but through some ideas that newer farmers have.
Just before we got finished, I just want to take an opportunity to speak to any farmers that are listening right now, any eaters that are engaged with farmers in the farming community, and say that we are about 2 weeks away from the end of our new application season. This is when we have new farms apply to be part of the program, and we kind of get them in our system. We get them ready to inspect during the year so that we can add more farms, 30,000 farms that we work with across the country. I think the best way you can engage with the work we're doing, the best way you can support the work we're doing, is to get certified with us. So I'd really encourage any farms out there, if you're thinking, hey, what does it matter? One more farm. It really does. Every community we're in, every farm we can work with, it really helps exponentially increase the work that Real Organic Project is doing to add integrity to the organic system, to bring organic agriculture back to the way we all believe it should be. So again, I'd really encourage you, if you're a farm, please consider applying. It is completely no cost, and you can apply online at realorganicproject.org/apply, realorganicproject.org/apply. And you can also request a paper application if you like, and I'll also mention the applications, both paper and electronic, are available in both English and Spanish. So thank you so much, and I really hope we get to meet some of you this upcoming growing season.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you will subscribe and share the link with your friends. Please take the time today to leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening so that others can find us. A video version of this interview is found at realorganicproject.org and by following our YouTube channel. Please join us next time when our guest will be well-known food systems author Michael Pollan. Michael joined us once again for our annual online symposium, along with 50 other thought leaders, to discuss the co-opting of regenerative and climate farming, since these terms are now affiliated with chem-no-till agriculture and endorsed by the USDA. You can find tickets to the recordings at realorganicsymposium.org, so please join us if you missed it.